Inside the U.S. Capitol, with over 12 million viewers watching live, Jasmine Crockett faces off against Elon Musk over serious accusations, tax evasion, labor abuse, and the manipulation of online information. Musk leans on his fame and fortune to dodge the heat, but just minutes later, Jasmine dismantles his defense with undeniable evidence, leaving the chamber in stunned silence. Power shifts, reputations collapse, and nothing about the system feels untouchable anymore. What did she expose that could bring one of the world's most powerful men to his knees? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blistering lights of the U.S. Capitol hearing room, the stage was set for one of the most explosive congressional showdowns in recent history. Reporters lined the back wall, pens poised, cameras humming as the name Elon Musk echoed through the marble chambers. The hearing wasn't about innovation. It was about accusations of tax evasion, labor abuse, and online censorship. At the center of it all, Musk strolled in, smirking, as if he owned not just the room but the system. He claimed his seat like a king returning to a conquered court. His tailored suit whispered money, but his eyes screamed contempt. This wasn't a man on trial. This was a man who believed the trial was beneath him. Across from him sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, unflinching. The moment she entered, the mood shifted from anticipation to voltage. She moved like a prosecutor seeking truth. Musk leaned forward with a smug grin and fired the first shot. "You're a politician, not an economist. Let's not pretend you understand how value is created." The room froze, not because of what he said, but because of what came next. Jasmine didn't respond with a dramatic retort. Instead, she slid a thick, leather-bound folder across her desk and opened it slowly. Page 1, marked with a blood-red tab, made her message clear. She wasn't here to argue. She was here to prove. In that silence, thick as smoke, Jasmine struck, not with volume, but with something far more dangerous, truth backed by undeniable evidence. She turned the first page of the folder, revealing a financial autopsy. "Let's start here," she said, voice steady, gaze locked ahead. Between 2015 and 2022, over $9.1 billion in profits from your companies, Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, were routed through offshore accounts from the British Virgin Islands to Luxembourg. She pressed a button on her tablet, and a massive diagram appeared on the overhead screen, a maze of faceless holding companies leading back to Musk himself. "Here," she said, pointing to a redline box, "an entity registered in Bermuda with 0 employees and yet reporting over $400 million in annual consulting revenue. Sir, that's not innovation, that's evasion." The room tightened. Journalists leaned in, aides whispered, and even the chairman's gavel seemed to still in midair. Jasmine continued, flipping to a printed email chain labeled "Re-Tax Optimization," dated mid-2018. "This," she said, holding up a page, "is your direct instruction. Shift projected earnings through a Luxembourg shell to avoid U.S. liabilities. Goal: 0 federal exposure." Beneath that note, in sharp ink, was Musk's signature. Not a copy, but the original. She laid it on the table slowly, like evidence in a criminal trial. The silence wasn't awkward, it was respect. Musk had always been the man no one dared touch, but here was a woman armed with documents and discipline, dragging the myth of untouchable genius into the daylight. Jasmine didn't gloat. Her voice stayed steady as she added, "While American families paid their taxes, you built rockets with money hidden from the very country that made you a billionaire." For the first time that morning, Musk had no words. But what came next didn't just reveal numbers. It exposed the raw arrogance behind the scheme. Jasmine stood still, her fingers resting lightly on the next page, then calmly said, "Let's look at your tone, Mr. Musk." The screen flickered to life again, showing an internal email dated March 2nd, 2020, marked "Confidential, Executive Only." She read aloud, "Not paying 1 damn cent to those idiots in D.C. Let them pass their fake budgets without me." The room went silent, not the silence of confusion, but the silence of impact, of realizing they just heard a billionaire declare open war on the country that enabled his success. Jasmine let the words settle, then added, That was not written by a frustrated assistant. That was written by you, Mr. Musk. The language idiots in D.C. refers to the very public servants who approved your subsidies and defended your interests. Her tone was precise and deeply cutting. This isn't just about a tax bill. This is about contempt for government, for law, for accountability, and most of all, for the American people who pay what you refuse to. She walked slowly across the floor, locking eyes with the audience, the senators, the cameras. It is not simply that you didn't contribute. It is that you laughed while not contributing. You insulted the very system that gave you your empire, then dared the rest of us to question it. Behind her, the email still glowed on the screen. Ugly, blunt, undeniable. For the first time in his public career, Musk wasn't seen as a genius. He was seen as a powerful man who believed the rules never applied to him. As the email hovered on the screen, the air inside the hearing room changed. The illusion of control began to slip, and Musk knew it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes narrowing, not in thought, but in calculated defiance. That quote's taken out of context, he began, his tone laced with practiced indignation. That entire email could have been fabricated or altered. I've written thousands of internal messages over the years. How do you even know this is mine? It was the tone of a man used to steamrolling over resistance with confidence alone. But this time, confidence wasn't enough, because just beneath the damning line on the screen was a signature. His signature, authenticated beyond doubt. There was no hiding from it. The silence that followed wasn't theatrical, it was procedural. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She calmly retrieved another folder and opened it slowly. This signature, she said, holding up a page with a side-by-side analysis, has been verified by 3 independent forensic handwriting experts. The metadata confirms the document's origin, the timestamp aligns with your own company servers, and the internal routing IDs match your executive email system. She let those facts land, not like accusations, but like weights pressing down against every attempt at denial. This isn't a misquote, Mr. Musk. It's a message. One you wrote, one you signed, and one you clearly meant. Musk didn't respond right away. For once, the man who had built rockets and launched satellites had nothing clever to say. His mouth opened, then closed again, as if searching for a version of the truth that would hurt less. But there wasn't one. The evidence wasn't abstract. It was physical, provable, and now public. Across from him, Jasmine didn't smile. She simply turned the next page in her file, as if to say, "We're just getting started." The documents had rattled the room. The signature had broken the mask. But what Jasmine said next didn't just question Musk's morality. It challenged the very soul of the empire he claimed to be building. She set aside the tax files and opened a thinner binder labeled Employee Statements Classified. "Mr. Musk," she began, "I want to shift focus, not from your empire, but from the people who make it run, the ones no one puts on magazine covers, the ones whose names you likely don't know. These are real testimonies from real workers, 27 in total, from your Nevada, Texas, and Fremont plants." She paused for emphasis, then clarified, "Not contractors, not third parties, your employees." The screen lit up again, now showing a spreadsheet of shift logs, entries stretching to 14 hours a day, 6 days a week. Some worked 78 hours in a single week, no overtime, no benefits. When they called in sick, they were told, "Miss another day and you're out." The room darkened, not literally, but emotionally. This wasn't about billion-dollar balance sheets anymore. It was about bodies, sweat, fear. Jasmine continued. One worker suffered a collapsed lung on site. He was told if he went to the hospital without finishing his shift, he'd lose his job. Another woman worked until her hands bled, literally. And when she asked for gloves, her supervisor told her, "You want safety? Get a job somewhere else." There was no rage in Jasmine's voice, just something colder. Deeper grief, perhaps, buried beneath duty. Then came the moment that froze the room. With a small remote, she played a 12-second audio clip. The voice rang out, "If you need more than 2 minutes to piss, then maybe you don't belong here. 2 minutes after that, you're on your own time, And we don't pay for that. The courtroom was silent. No one blinked. No one moved because suddenly this wasn't about Elon Musk the billionaire. This was about something uglier, a culture that punished humanity in the name of efficiency. Jasmine let the moment hang. She didn't rush. Then she held up a single sheet of paper, folded and worn. This was written by a former employee, a first-generation immigrant. He worked 72 hours the week he was fired for missing one shift due to fever. He wrote, "Please tell Mr. Elon I'm not lazy. I just wanted to get better. I'm sorry." Her voice didn't crack, but her hands gripped the paper like it carried more than ink. "You call yourself a visionary, but I have to ask you, Mr. Musk, is this what vision looks like?" She turned fully to face him. When people dream of the future, they don't imagine this. They don't imagine punishment for bathroom breaks. They don't imagine being treated like parts in a machine. The question she asked next wasn't for him. It was for the country, for every person watching. Is this the future we're letting one man define for all of us? And in that moment, Musk didn't look like a genius. He looked like what he was, silent, still, and for the first time, visibly cornered. The weight of worker testimony still hung heavy in the room, but Jasmine didn't let the moment dissipate. If Musk's empire was built on silence, then it was time to ask who else he had silenced and how. She turned back to the screen, revealing a different kind of document, one not measured in dollars or labor hours, but in names and voices. "Let's move to the digital side of your empire," she began. "X, formerly known as Twitter. Your acquisition, your platform, your rules." The screen filled with rows of names, verified journalists, professors, nonprofit researchers, climate activists. Every one of these individuals reported one thing in common. Their reach was suppressed, their voices muted, their posts made invisible after they criticized you. She stepped forward. "Not the platform, you." The words were sharp, specific. This wasn't abstract theory. It was a confrontation with motive. She tapped the remote, and the screen displayed a single tweet, a clean critique of Tesla's environmental claims, posted by a climate journalist from Oregon. Within 2 hours, her article disappeared from trending sections. By morning, her account had been flagged for suspicious behavior, despite a clean history. Jasmine allowed the image to sit there a moment longer before flipping to the next, a respected academic from MIT. This professor published peer-reviewed findings that questioned the integrity of your self-driving data. That same day, 7 of his most cited tweets had their engagement slashed by over 90%. Then she brought up a third image, a screenshot from a small mental health nonprofit focused on PTSD support for veterans. They had posted testimonials from former SpaceX employees detailing panic attacks and burnout. And you labeled it misinformation. Their traffic tanked within 48 hours. Their donations fell by half. There was no need to raise her voice. The evidence did the shouting. This isn't about moderation. This is about manipulation, about creating an ecosystem where criticism goes to die and praise floats to the top. Then she walked slowly toward the long oak bench where Musk sat, arms folded, jaw tight. "You've taken one of the world's most powerful communication tools and reshaped it, not to empower truth, but to shield yourself from it." Her words landed like a slow-building storm. "You say you're protecting free speech, but whose speech gets protected and whose gets buried?" Finally, she reached the end of the aisle, turned fully to him, and delivered the question. Not as a soundbite, but with the full weight of a nation behind it. "Are you controlling this platform to protect free expression or to silence anything that threatens your brand, your companies, and your control?" No one moved. Not the senators, not the reporters, not even the security guards, because deep down, they all understood what had just happened. For the first time, someone wasn't just challenging Musk's business decisions, she was challenging his ethics, his narrative, and his legacy. And the only thing louder than her question was his silence. After being cornered by facts too solid to deny and testimonies too human to dismiss, Musk did what powerful men often do when held to account. He redirected the spotlight, hoping it might blind the truth. Leaning forward with the practiced ease of someone used to controlling the narrative, Musk let out a low, deliberate breath and began, Congresswoman Crockett, his voice tight but rehearsed. With all due respect, you're framing this completely wrong. His tone wasn't defensive. It was performative, laced with the condescension of a billionaire accustomed to difference. While you spend your time digging through internal documents and cherry-picking complaints, I've been creating opportunity. His hand gestured toward the gallery as if inviting applause. Hundreds of thousands of Americans now have jobs because of what we've built. Tesla, SpaceX, Starlink. Our factories aren't just buildings. They're engines of economic revival. His voice rose slightly, feeding on the performance. I've reignited the aerospace industry, made electric vehicles mainstream, and connected remote communities through satellite internet. The list was long, impressive, and completely detached from the accusations leveled against him. Musk wasn't addressing the workers who collapsed from exhaustion or the tweets buried in silence. He was invoking rockets and revolutions to bury reality under spectacle. Then his voice shifted colder. Frankly, it seems this hearing is less about oversight and more about optics. You need a villain. You need someone to point at and say, here's the bad guy. And since I have actually done something, since I've built what others only talk about, you've chosen me. He glanced at Crockett, not with fear, but with thinly veiled disdain. But let's be clear, you're not challenging corruption, you're challenging progress. You're standing in the way of people who are trying to build the future while you're clinging to the past. His arms folded across his chest, the performance complete. In his mind, he had won the moment, not with truth, but with volume. But what he couldn't see, what the cameras were already capturing, was the stillness of Jasmine Crockett as she listened. She hadn't interrupted once. She hadn't reacted, because she understood something he didn't. Success doesn't excuse harm. Progress doesn't erase responsibility. She took a breath, measured, steady, and then leaned in, her voice quiet but unmistakably firm. Mr. Musk, she began, you've spoken at length about vision, about building the future, changing the world, leading humanity to new frontiers. But what you failed to speak about are the people who make that possible, the ones soldering wires at 3 a.m., the ones working back-to-back shifts because missing a day means missing rent, the ones who get injured and are told their pain is an inconvenience. She gestured toward the testimony folder again, not to repeat the facts, but to remind the room they were still there, still breathing beneath every word. I don't deny your ambition. I don't even deny your achievements. But I refuse to let you redefine success as something that can be built on suffering. The weight of those words hung in the air, pressing into every corner of the chamber. You talk about pushing humanity forward, but forward to what, Mr. Musk? A future where workers are disposable, where speaking up gets you silenced, where human value is measured only in productivity per hour. Her tone never rose, but it sharpened like the point of a scalpel. If that's the future, then I have to ask, who exactly is it for? And then with calm that cut through the noise like a blade through silk, she said it, not for the cameras, not for the headlines, but for the people who never get invited into rooms like this. Innovation is never an excuse to trample human dignity. She didn't pause for effect. She let the words do what they were meant to do, land, root, and grow, not in applause, but in conscience. Because Crockett understood that true accountability doesn't scream, it stands. And in that moment, she was standing for every name Musk had omitted, every voice he had muted, every worker who had been treated as a number in a system that promised a better world. It's just not for them. She had already dismantled the myth of benevolence, exposed the cruelty beneath his factories, and torn through the illusion of free speech. But now Jasmine Crockett was ready to strike at the heart of the empire itself, its grip on power. She reached for a small remote. No drama, no buildup, just deliberate intent. The screen behind her glowed to life. A grainy video filled the chamber, handheld, slightly tilted, filmed at what appeared to be a lavish private gathering. Soft jazz played in the background. Crystal glasses clinked. The atmosphere was one of ease, old money and new power mingling behind closed doors. Then came the voice, smooth, confident, unmistakably Elon Musk. On the screen, he stood with a drink in one hand, gesturing casually with the other. He laughed and then said the words that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. I bought this government. I mean, let's be honest, these guys, they don't move unless I write the check. Another wave of laughter followed in the room on screen, but in the hearing chamber, no one moved. The silence was absolute. Jasmine didn't speak immediately. She let the footage play again. Just that sentence looped. The echo of his voice in that sterile congressional space was more powerful than any gavel. Then she looked up, not just at Musk, but at the committee, at the audience, at the nation watching. Her voice was even, but beneath the calm was a fury so focused it sounded like steel being drawn from a sheath. That recording was taken 3 months ago, she said, at a closed fundraiser in Aspen. We verified the location, the source, and the voice. Mr. Musk has not denied it, not publicly, and until now, not under oath. She tapped again. The screen shifted to a spreadsheet, rows of transactions, dates, political committees, shell organizations. It was meticulous, clinical, damning. Jasmine spoke clearly. This is a breakdown of more than $72 million in contributions made through intermediaries, third-party PACs, and so-called social welfare nonprofits. None of it disclosed in a way the average voter would ever see. But all of it leads back to entities controlled directly or indirectly by Mr. Musk or his executive officers. She raised her eyes. This isn't campaign finance. This is quiet domination. Her words were plain, not dramatic, not embellished, just truth stripped of spin. Around the room, you could see the shift. Senators who had previously nodded during Musk's testimony now shifted in their seats, suddenly unsure of their posture. One staffer gently nudged a notepad over a microphone, shielding a whisper. A Republican senator who had praised Musk's visionary leadership now avoided eye contact, his hands clenched beneath the desk. Jasmine saw it all and pressed forward. Mr. Musk, when you said those words, I bought this government, you weren't joking, you were confessing, and the evidence is right here. She held up a thick, tabbed folder labeled Private Influence Classified Disbursements, and then she delivered the line, not for headlines, not for applause, but because it had to be said aloud. You didn't just exploit the system, you tried to own it, and now the American people finally get to see what that looks like. Reporters in the gallery had already broken embargo. Phone screens glowed with breaking alerts. The phrase, I bought this government, surged on social media like a shockwave. Jasmine didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the man who had spent a decade convincing the world that brilliance excused everything. And for once, Musk said nothing, not a word, because there was nothing left to say. The numbers had been exposed, the recordings played, the illusion of invincibility cracked. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done, because behind every policy failure, every dollar buried in secrecy, was a human face. She turned to the chamber doors and gave a quiet nod. The cameras shifted, the tension rose, and through the center aisle walked a woman in a plain black dress, clutching a folded piece of paper with both hands. She didn't look like a lobbyist or an attorney. She looked like what she was, a widow. Her name was Rosa Alvarez. Her husband, Daniel, had worked 16-hour shifts at a Tesla battery plant in Sparks, Nevada. Jasmine introduced her gently. This is Rosa. Her husband died in a fire that shouldn't have happened, and she's here to tell you why. Rosa's voice trembled at first, but it didn't break. Daniel was told to finish his shift, she said softly, even after he reported the fire alarm system wasn't working. He asked to leave early. He was denied. The floor manager told him, we can't afford delays. She paused, breathing in, steadying herself. 2 hours later, the explosion happened. You could hear people shift in their chairs. The scraping of pens stopped. Musk didn't look up. Rosa continued, I got a call at 3:07 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, it wasn't the company. It was a co-worker who said Daniel didn't make it. He died trying to pull someone else out. She reached into her purse and unfolded a drawing, crayoned hearts, a stick figure with a cape. My daughter made this. The next day, she told me, Dad is a hero now, right? And I didn't know what to say. Jasmine stepped beside her now and held up a second piece of paper, this one written in a child's uneven scroll, sealed in a blue envelope. This, she said, voice quiet but unshakable, is the letter Daniel's 8-year-old daughter sent to my office. She read it aloud. Dear Miss Jasmine, my daddy died at work. He tried to tell them something was broken, but they made him stay. Please help. Don't let more dads be gone. Love, Elena. The words landed like thunder, without sound, too soft to scream, too heavy to ignore. For a full 10 seconds, no one spoke. Then slowly, as if moved by something beyond politics, members of the chamber began to rise. First one, then another, and then the entire room stood. Staffers, press, even those who had once defended Musk's leadership, rising not for applause but because they couldn't remain seated after hearing that. Jasmine said nothing more. She didn't need to. She placed the letter on the table beside the financial documents and classified memos, as if to say, "This is the most important piece of evidence here." Rosa stepped away, holding her daughter's drawing to her chest like a shield, her eyes wet but her posture straight. And for the first time that day, power didn't belong to wealth or algorithms. It belonged to a mother who buried her husband and a little girl whose plea now echoed through the halls of Congress. The applause had faded. The letter was back in its envelope. Rosa Alvarez had stepped away. But something far more profound remained in the air: the absence of denial. Elon Musk sat motionless, not adjusting his tie, not flipping through notes, not even pretending to rebut. For a man who had built his empire on boldness, who had dominated headlines and crafted an entire mythology around always having the last word, his silence was deafening. His jaw was tight, his posture rigid. But there were no words, and everyone in the room knew why. The weight of the testimonies, the footage, the paper trail, the child's letter, it hadn't just exposed contradictions. It had shattered the illusion of control. No data point could counter what America had just seen. No carefully worded statement could cleanse the image of a grieving widow or the sound of a child asking why her father never came home. Musk's empire wasn't being challenged by a rival. It was being held accountable by reality. Jasmine Crockett stood slowly. No raised voice, no dramatic gesture. Just the calm of someone who had told the truth from the start and now stood in its shadow. "You have nothing left to say, Mr. Musk," she asked, not as a challenge, but as confirmation. No answer. She waited. Nothing. His eyes didn't meet hers. His lips didn't part. He sat, the richest man in the room, outmaneuvered not by wealth or status, but by the weight of what he'd refused to confront. She turned back toward the chamber. "Your silence," she said, "is no longer just a tactic. It is a confession, and it is the one this country has needed." The words echoed in a way no gavel could. Her gaze moved across the panel, those who had defended him, those who had hesitated, those who had watched in stunned stillness as testimony turned into reckoning. "For hours," she continued, "we have listened to defenses built on innovation, ego, and empire. But when confronted with truth, not ideology, not opinion, but truth, there were no words." She lifted the letter once more. This wasn't a smear campaign. This wasn't political theater. This was accountability. And now that truth stands alone because the man who should have answered it won't. Her words had no tremble. They were as sharp as the silence that followed. "This hearing was never about Elon Musk, the businessman," she said. "It was about whether anyone in this country, regardless of their net worth or following, has the right to operate beyond consequence. It was about whether progress can justify pain, whether success can sanitize suffering." She paused, and when given the chance to defend his actions, to explain them, to show even a sliver of regret, he chose silence. Reporters scrambled, phones lit up. But Jasmine didn't speak for them. She spoke for everyone who had been too afraid, too small, too invisible to ever sit in a room like this and be heard. To every worker who stayed silent out of fear, to every whistleblower who was silenced by power, to every child who wondered why their parent never came home, she said, steady, unwavering, "This silence is your proof. This silence is your justice." Musk remained frozen. His silence was no longer strategy. It was surrender. His empire wasn't falling in flames. It was cracking quietly right in front of a nation that had finally stopped looking the other way. and Jasmine Crockett stood at the center of it, not gloating, not celebrating, but carrying the stillness with purpose. Her job was never to destroy him, it was to reveal him. And in that moment, she had done exactly that. Musk's silence echoed longer than any speech could, but inside the Capitol, silence was no longer an option. The room had shifted from hearing to action, from exposure to consequence. As Jasmine Crockett stepped back from the microphone, the stillness that had gripped the chamber gave way to motion, fast, yet deliberate, irreversible. One senator stood, then another. Staffers whispered urgently into phones. The chair of the Oversight Committee cleared her throat and addressed the room with a voice sharpened by urgency. Based on the evidence presented, this committee will formally recommend a Department of Justice inquiry into potential criminal tax fraud, labor violations, and obstruction of regulatory oversight by Mr. Elon Musk and affiliated entities. And through it all, Elon Musk said nothing. His counsel leaned in, his jaw clenched. His empire, so carefully constructed, was now under federal scrutiny from every angle. But what was happening outside was even more undeniable. The cameras turned toward the Capitol steps, where a crowd had begun to form. Hours earlier, it had swelled into something larger, something historic. Thousands stood shoulder to shoulder, waving signs that weren't written in anger, but in resolve. No one stands above justice. Innovation doesn't excuse abuse. Dignity is not disruptible. The chants were steady, rhythmic, not violent, relentless. A group of workers from California wore matching t-shirts. "We built it, he buried us." Veterans held signs next to students, single mothers next to union leaders, tech whistleblowers next to clergy. A movement was forming, not for punishment, but for reckoning. One reporter pushed through the crowd and held a mic to a woman with tears in her eyes and a photo of her brother pinned to her chest. He worked for Tesla. He died from heat stroke. No brakes, no ventilation. This hearing brought him back into the light. Her voice cracked. "We were told we'd never be heard, but Jasmine Crockett changed that." Up on the Capitol balcony, the scene was visible even to those still inside. A senator stepped out, took one look, and whispered, "This is bigger than we thought." Across the country, television anchors interrupted regular programming. Social feeds lit up like a live wire. Breaking federal inquiry recommended into Musk. Thousands gather outside Capitol for worker justice. And one headline repeated across channels, from Fox to MSNBC, stamped itself into history. The system finally looked back. And beneath that, an image. Jasmine Crockett standing at her desk, eyes forward, unshaken, not triumphant, just ready. Because this wasn't the end of the story. It was the moment America decided to turn the page. The storm that began inside the hearing room didn't end with the gavel. It only changed form. And within days, the aftershocks reached every boardroom, every newsroom, and every screen in America. 72 hours after Jasmine Crockett walked out of that hearing room, Washington, D.C. had transformed from a battleground of testimony into a command center for accountability. There were no delays, no committee deadlocks, no endless procedural debates. What the country had seen could not be unseen. What had been heard could not be dismissed. The Oversight Chair called an emergency session at 6:45 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. By noon, with bipartisan support, rare even in wartime, a special investigative committee had been approved. Its authority was sweeping: subpoena power without limitation, full access to private financial records, sealed internal communications, and executive meeting transcripts from all Musk-affiliated entities, including Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and X-Corp. The committee would not only examine tax fraud and labor abuse, but the intentional use of political donations to bypass regulatory scrutiny. It was the kind of commission usually reserved for defense contractors and fallen presidents, and now it bore one name: Musk. By the end of the day, the ripple had reached Wall Street. Tesla's stock, once unshakable, dropped by 9% before the markets even opened. By closing bell, it had fallen 13% more. Hedge funds scrambled to offload their positions in Musk companies, triggering an avalanche of institutional withdrawal. Private investors began whispering about clawbacks and criminal exposure. Major banks that had once lined up to fund his ventures quietly initiated internal audits. Within 5 days, more than $112 billion in shareholder value had been wiped away, 20.7% across his portfolio. What began as a hearing was now a fiscal bloodbath. Boards panicked. General counsels called emergency meetings. The empire that had felt eternal just a week ago now felt mortal. But what truly shook the nation wasn't in the boardrooms. It was on the internet. It started with one man, Jared Ortiz, a former line worker at Tesla's Giga Texas plant. His video was raw, filmed in the parking lot of a gas station. "They told us we were the future," he said, eyes bloodshot. "But you speak up about safety or pay, and suddenly your badge doesn't scan. The next morning, you just disappear." It got 60,000 views in its first hour. Then came another. Maya Chen, a former robotics programmer at SpaceX. They asked for 18-hour days in silence. The second you say no, they say you don't fit the culture. What does that mean? That I didn't shut up fast enough? Then more, dozens, hundreds, workers across divisions, languages, generations. Some were barely out of college. Some were grizzled veterans who had welded panels for Falcon rockets with pride until they were forced out for being too vocal. There were those who spoke softly, and those who cried on camera, those who covered their faces in fear, and those who looked straight into the lens with fire in their eyes. By the end of the week, over 420 self-recorded clips had been compiled into a 3-hour documentary titled Inside the Machine, Stories from the Empire. It was released for free on every platform. Overnight, it passed 40 million views. The hashtag #ElonAccountable didn't just trend, it exploded. By Thursday afternoon, it had overtaken international political hashtags, celebrity scandals, even the Super Bowl. It wasn't just a trend, it was a rallying cry. And it wasn't driven by trolls or pundits. It was driven by former employees, labor advocates, students, teachers, veterans, and yes, grieving families. People weren't just angry, they were clarified. For years, the name Elon Musk had been synonymous with genius, disruption, even heroism. But now it had become a mirror, and the reflection wasn't progress, but the price of it. And the dominoes didn't stop at public opinion. 3 Democratic senators, joined by 2 Republicans, introduced an emergency ethics bill requiring that any tech CEO under criminal investigation be barred from receiving federal contracts. A dozen states opened inquiries into labor law violations at Musk-owned facilities. The SEC issued a preliminary inquiry into potential securities fraud, alleging that Musk's public statements about company culture and fiscal transparency were materially misleading. Whistleblower protections were expanded overnight, with over 2,000 filings submitted within the first 72 hours of the new hotline's activation. And then there was the quiet unraveling inside the empire. At Tesla HQ in Palo Alto, internal Slack channels flooded with screenshots from the hearing. Employees debated whether to organize. Managers told teams to stay focused while privately requesting legal counsel. A vice president in charge of human resources resigned without notice. 2 major advertising clients for X Corp announced suspensions of ad campaigns, citing concerns with leadership integrity. SpaceX canceled a press event meant to showcase Mars mission prototypes. Internally, staffers joked bitterly that they'd rename the operation Red Dust because of how fast everything was collapsing. Despite the chaos, Elon Musk had not posted a single tweet. No memes, no clever rebuttals, no free speech crusade, just silence. In the void, his followers grew restless. But the silence wasn't strategic, it was suffocating. Because outside his corporate gates, a movement was forming. Grassroots campaigns called for employee unions. A group of ex-employees filed for class action status against Tesla for wrongful termination and retaliation. Civil rights organizations drafted formal complaints citing racial and gender discrimination across Neuralink's hiring practices. The voices that had once been scattered and afraid were now unified in public, and they were being listened to. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained notably silent. She gave no press conferences, no grand speeches. She refused offers for interviews with primetime hosts. When asked, her only statement was brief. "This is not my story. It belongs to the people who lived it." The headlines were relentless. Markets bleed as Musk faces historic backlash. Special committee targets, political influence network. America reacts. The empire has a face now, and it's frightened. And still, the people gathered outside federal buildings, in union halls, on campuses, in small towns that had once believed in the tech dream until it crushed them. They gathered not just to chant, but to remember, to name names, to say out loud what had been whispered for too long. That innovation is not an excuse for cruelty, that success is not a shield from scrutiny, that even the most powerful man in the world could finally be made to answer. And behind every headline, every hearing, every hashtag, one truth surged louder than all the rest. The age of silence was over. As the hearings shook, the foundations of power and voices once silenced rose across the country. One figure emerged, not as a headline chaser, not as a political brand, but as a symbol of moral defiance in a system long deaf to truth. Jasmine Crockett. It started quietly. A local newspaper in Houston ran the headline first, "The Voice for the Voiceless." Then a mid-sized network in Ohio repeated it. By the end of the week, it was everywhere, from cable banners to late-night monologues to handwritten protest signs in front of federal courthouses. Jasmine Crockett, the woman who stood still while power buckled. She hadn't asked for the spotlight, she hadn't chased it, but it followed her now, not out of spectacle, but out of reverence. Americans from every walk of life, nurses, factory workers, teachers, veterans, single mothers, found something in her silence, her composure, her unwavering resolve that echoed deeper than any slogan. She hadn't just confronted Elon Musk. She had named what so many had only whispered, that unchecked power, no matter how brilliant, is still just power, and it must answer to something greater. The networks begged for interviews, the White House requested a meeting, but Jasmine Crockett declined them all. She had no interest in becoming a brand. Her interest was in becoming a mirror held up to a country that had grown used to looking away. But when the call came for a national address, broadcast from the Capitol, carried live on every major outlet, she said yes, not for herself, not even for the movement, but for the people who had written her letters, for the little girl who signed her name with a crayon and begged her to stop more fathers from dying at work, for the workers who sent voicemails through tears, afraid they'd be fired just for speaking the truth. On the night of the address, the Capitol steps were lined with candles. The sky above Washington was dark and cloudless. The rotunda inside had been cleared. No podium, no fanfare, just a single wooden chair. Jasmine Crockett walked in alone, placed a folded piece of paper on the table in front of her, and looked straight into the camera. "My name," she said, "is Jasmine Crockett, and I am not here tonight as a politician or a prosecutor or even a congresswoman. I'm here as a witness to what happens when power forgets people, a witness to what happens when we trade decency for disruption and truth for access." Her voice was low, measured, but there was no mistaking the intensity behind her words. Over the past week, this country has watched the testimony of workers who were told to choose between their jobs and their dignity, of engineers told to be silent or be replaced, of families told their loss was a cost of progress. She looked down briefly at Elena's letter and unfolded it in her hands. "I've read letters from children who still think their fathers are coming home, from mothers who buried sons without a single apology, and from young people who once dreamed of working for companies they now fear." The nation listened. Screens flickered in silence across diners, hospital waiting rooms, airports, even in Silicon Valley. Tech leaders who had once quoted Musk now watched with arms crossed, unable to deny what had unfolded. Jasmine pressed on. "America has never been perfect," she said, "but we have always claimed to value justice. Tonight I ask a simple question. If justice can be purchased, if truth can be throttled, if labor can be silenced while wealth is applauded, then what are we?" She sat forward now, her voice sharper but never loud. "We are told that the future belongs to the bold, but I have seen boldness that exploits, that extracts, that silences. That is not courage. That is convenience wearing the mask of innovation." She paused just long enough for the words to land. "Courage is what I saw in the faces of workers who spoke up knowing they might be followed, fired, or worse. Courage is what I saw in a grieving widow who sat in the chamber of power and told the truth without trembling. Courage is a little girl who wrote a letter and asked not for revenge, but for safety. And then she delivered the line that would be etched in memory. America is not a place where power should win over principle, and justice is not something to be auctioned to the highest bidder. The silence that followed was complete, not empty but full, full of recognition, of reckoning, of something this country rarely hears. Accountability spoken not with fury, but with purpose. She continued, "We are now at a crossroads. One road leads us back to comfort, to complicity, to allowing the powerful to insulate themselves from the pain they cause. The other leads forward, but only if we have the courage to hold even the most untouchable to account. That means reform, that means legal consequence, and most of all, that means remembering that democracy, real democracy, is loudest when it listens to the quietest among us." She folded the letter again. This time she didn't put it back in the envelope. She placed it on the desk right beside her notes, as if to say, "This belongs to Elena now." And to every person who believed they were invisible. You are not, you never were. By the time she stood, the hashtags had already reignited. Cursor, voice for the voiceless. Mracher, Crockett, truth. Elena deserves better. But Jasmine didn't read them. She walked out of the rotunda the same way she had entered, without applause, without entourage, because this wasn't about a career. This was about a country that had just been reminded by one woman, one voice, that no one is above justice, not even the richest man in the world. Jasmine Crockett's national address didn't just stir hearts, it stirred history. And in the days that followed, the echo of her words began to shape something even more enduring. A law written not in corporate interest, but in human truth. The Capitol dome still glowed beneath the winter sky when the first draft of legislation was filed. The Technology and Human Rights Balance Act, quickly dubbed by the press as the Human Dignity Bill. Its purpose was simple on paper, but revolutionary in scope, to ensure that innovation would never again come at the cost of the people building it. No more sweatshop silence behind billion-dollar breakthroughs. No more secret settlements buried beneath NDAs. No more platforms burying dissent behind algorithms. The bill proposed sweeping reforms, mandatory labor audits for companies over 10,000 employees, a national whistleblower protection expansion for tech workers, criminal liability for executive concealment of safety violations, and for the first time, independent federal oversight of digital speech throttling when platforms wield undue control over public discourse. But perhaps the most searing clause was the one written personally by Jasmine Crockett's legal team. No technology, no matter how transformative, shall be allowed to violate the fundamental rights to safety, dignity, and truth without consequence. It was printed in bold center page, underlined twice in the draft. A line that didn't read like legal language, it read like a vow. Debate erupted in Congress, but it was different this time. There were no sneers about overregulation, no blanket defenses of the private sector's right to innovate. Senators who had watched that hearing firsthand found themselves unable to repeat the same tired scripts. And those who tried were met with overwhelming public backlash. Polls shifted overnight. 84% of Americans supported stronger labor protections in the tech sector. 71% favored independent audits of political donations from major tech figures. Even the most conservative commentators admitted on air, the public isn't anti-business, they're anti-abuse. There's a difference, and Crockett made it clear. Outside the walls of government, the movement had outgrown hashtags. In Austin, 2,000 software engineers walked out in solidarity with warehouse workers from their own company. In Boston, professors began teaching a unit titled The Crockett Doctrine, Ethics in the Age of Innovation. In Detroit, auto workers raised signs once meant for union fights that now bore 5 simple words: justice is not optional anymore. And through it all, Jasmine Crockett remained the same, focused, deliberate, unwilling to bend to noise. She didn't ride the wave. She redirected it toward legislation, toward hearings, toward concrete change. During a press briefing 1 week after the bill's introduction, a reporter asked, "Congresswoman, Do you realize you've become a symbol? Jasmine paused, glanced down, then replied, Symbols don't change laws. People do. I'm just doing what this job demands when it's done honestly. And yet the reality was clear. She was the symbol now of reckoning, of clarity, of what it looked like when the truth didn't flinch in the face of empire. Tech CEOs gave panicked interviews, assuring shareholders they welcomed transparency. Musk himself issued a 72-word statement calling the proposed law short-sighted, but he didn't appear in public. He couldn't. Every time his name trended, it was followed by another story, another voice, another reminder that genius is not a license, and that disruption without conscience is just another form of decay. Inside the House chamber, when the bill finally came to vote, there was no shouting, no applause, just quiet, the kind that precedes the irreversible. It passed by a wide margin, and when it reached the Senate, the margins were even larger. One veteran senator from Vermont, who had spent 4 decades on the floor, whispered into the microphone before casting his vote, This one actually matters." The bill was signed into law within days. That afternoon, Jasmine returned to the steps of the Capitol, not for a press conference, not for a celebration, but for a small private moment. She stood alone, watching as a group of middle school students from El Paso were given a tour of the building. One of them, a girl with braided hair and oversized glasses, recognized her. "You're the lady from the hearing," she said shyly. "You told the truth." Jasmine knelt and smiled. "It's your world now," she said. "Make sure you protect it better than we did." And as the sun dipped behind the Capitol dome, something had shifted, not just in the political landscape, but in the American conscience itself. No one would ever look at unchecked power the same way again. No one would accept silence as neutrality. No one would mistake innovation for immunity, because Jasmine Crockett had drawn a line in the sand, and this time, the country didn't step back. It stepped forward, a little bruised, a little late, but stronger, and it would never be the same again. The law had passed, the headlines had faded, and the cameras had turned away. But what remained was something deeper, something more enduring than any legislative victory, the moral weight of what had been revealed and the lesson America could no longer afford to ignore. This story was never just about Elon Musk. It wasn't about one billionaire or one corporation or even one hearing. It was about the way power insulates itself, how it builds walls of silence, walls of fear, and dares anyone to speak against it. Jasmine Crockett didn't enter that room expecting to destroy a man. She walked in with something far more dangerous to systems of unchecked authority, the unflinching belief that truth matters, even when it's inconvenient. And in doing so, she reminded an entire nation that power without accountability is not leadership. It's tyranny in a suit. The lesson was brutal in its clarity. If you allow brilliance to blind you, you will never see the hands that are bleeding to build the future. And yet the most painful truths revealed were not about policy, but about people, about how a little girl had to become the voice her father never got to be, about how workers were taught to fear asking for safety, about how the louder someone's influence grew online, the more invisible the people beneath them became. The story exposed something America has long tried to suppress, that progress is not always forward, and that sometimes in the rush toward innovation, we step over those we no longer bother to see. It wasn't just a failure of corporate ethics, it was a failure of collective attention. We looked away until someone finally refused to. What Jasmine did wasn't extraordinary because she had the power to speak. It was extraordinary because she chose to speak when everything around her told her not to. She faced a man whose reach spanned continents, whose money could bury any scandal, whose fame could warp any narrative, and she didn't flinch. The lesson wasn't just in her words, it was in her restraint, in her silence when others yelled, in her clarity when others spun. She made the truth louder than any headline, not by shouting, but by holding the line with dignity. And in doing so, she showed millions that moral courage isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just steady, unshaken, immovable. But perhaps the most haunting takeaway is this. The structures that allowed all of this, the silence, the evasion, the dehumanization, they didn't collapse. They were challenged, they were seen, but they still exist. And that's where the real test begins. Because the lesson doesn't end with a hearing, it begins when we ask ourselves, how many times have we chosen comfort over conscience? How often have we called exploitation a necessity for growth? How many people have we ignored because listening meant responsibility? Jasmine Crockett's confrontation wasn't just with Elon Musk, it was with all of us. And it asked one question louder than any accusation. What are you willing to tolerate in the name of progress? This story proves something we forget too often, that systems do not change because of viral outrage or trending hashtags. They change when people like Jasmine choose to stand still in the face of the storm and refuse to move until the walls crack. They change when truth becomes more costly to ignore than to confront. They change when the voiceless are not rescued, but empowered. The lesson isn't about punishment, it's about vision, about the kind of world we want to build, and who we're willing to become to build it. Not just faster, not just smarter, but better, more just, more human. And so the final image isn't of Jasmine Crockett walking out of the Capitol or standing at a podium. It's the image of her listening to a child's letter, to a widow's grief, to a factory worker's whisper, and answering not with a sound bite, but with action. That is the lesson, that power when unchecked is dangerous, but truth when chosen is unstoppable. And if we remember that, if we hold to it, not just in hearings, but in hallways, boardrooms, classrooms, and voting booths, then this story doesn't end in justice. It begins in change, real, lasting change. And in the quiet aftermath of a battle long overdue, we are left with one undeniable truth. The future does not belong to those who speak loudest. It belongs to those who listen and then do something about it. The lesson was clear, the truth undeniable. But a reckoning without responsibility is just a moment. What came next would determine whether this story changed history or simply faded into it. So now the question shifts to you, because this isn't just Jasmine Crockett's fight, it's ours. If injustice can thrive in boardrooms lit by billion-dollar ideas, if silence can drown out screams inside factories with no windows, then it will happen again, unless someone stands. And not just once, not just when the cameras are rolling. Every single day, in the workplace, in the courtroom, in the quiet spaces where people whisper truths they've been too afraid to speak aloud. You don't need a microphone or a title to do what's right. You need a line you refuse to cross, a voice you refuse to silence, a truth you refuse to ignore. Look around you. There are people right now, your neighbors, your coworkers, maybe even your family, being crushed under systems that reward cruelty and punish conscience. The very same forces that Jasmine confronted live in algorithms, in laws not enforced, in loopholes used as ladders by the powerful. They survive because we allow them to, because we look the other way, because we tell ourselves it's not our job to fight them. But it is, and it always has been. The moment we believe that someone else will do it is the moment we let another life fall into the dark, another child grow up fatherless, another worker get buried in silence. That is not a future we can afford. So don't just be outraged, be organized. Don't just applaud Jasmine, join her. Support legislation that protects whistleblowers. Push for transparency in corporate lobbying. Demand real oversight, not just when it's convenient, but always. Use your vote, use your voice, use your story. And when someone tells you to sit down, to stay quiet, to wait, stand up anyway. Because if Jasmine Crockett taught us anything, it's that you don't have to be the loudest person in the room. You just have to be the one who doesn't look away. The truth has broken through. Now we must choose. Do we leave it exposed and forgotten, or do we build something around it, stronger, fairer, more human? The next chapter hasn't been written yet, but if it's going to be different, it starts here. It starts now, and it starts with you. Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything, like subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.